In the heart of a freezing Wyoming blizzard, a retired special ops officer thought he was finally leaving his past behind, until a single, desperate cry tore through the storm. What he found wasn't just a wounded German shepherd, her leg crushed in a steel trap, but a newborn pup trembling beneath her broken body. And the moment he lifted them into his arms, he triggered a battle against nature, the law, and the darkest memories he'd tried to bury. Because saving them wasn't just about survival, it was his last chance to save himself. If you care about courage, loyalty, or the kind of love that survives the impossible, you cannot miss this story. Subscribe now to follow more breathtaking rescues and true heart-pounding journeys. Snow battered the mountainside cabin like a restless spirit clawing to get in, the wind carving sharp whips of ice across the Wyoming peaks. Inside, David Mercer sat motionless at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug he had forgotten to sip from, the steam long faded into the cold night air. At 56, David carried the kind of presence that once commanded entire tactical teams, tall, broad-shouldered, built from decades of physical demand, though now softened at the edges by injury and time. Deep lines cut across his square jaw, and streaks of silver threaded through the dark beard he trimmed every Sunday out of old habit. His eyes, storm blue and heavy, held the weight of a man who had seen too many lives fall through his hands. He had left the Special Response Unit 18 months earlier after his right knee collapsed under shrapnel, and his team leader, a man he'd served beside for a decade, died in the chaos of a failed hostage rescue. David had carried that memory like a stone sewn into his chest, heavy, cold, impossible to remove. Retiring early was the only choice he had left, though retired felt like a lie. He hadn't rested in a single night since the mission. Across the cabin, Laura Mercer tightened the blanket around her arms as she moved toward him. At 53, she had the graceful strength of a woman who spent her life holding a broken man together after every mission. She wore her brown hair tied into a low knot, strands escaping and brushing her warm olive skin. Her eyes, soft hazel flecked with amber, held a patience the world didn't deserve. Laura worked as a part-time therapist in town, but her real work had always been David. She slid into the seat across from him, studying his distant stare. "Your leg's bothering you again," she said gently, noting the tension in his jaw. "It always does," David murmured, stretching the knee that still caught and trembled from old fractures. He looked away, not wanting to meet her concerned gaze. The wind roared against the windows. Beyond the glass, the world disappeared in white. Laura reached out, touching the back of his hand. "You're somewhere else tonight," David exhaled. "It's the storm. Sounds too much like that night." Laura didn't need him to explain. She had heard him relive the mission in jagged fragments during sleepless nights. The gunfire swallowed by wind, the snow filling their footprints, the shout of his team leader, Jack Rowley, cut off mid-command, and the silence afterward, the kind that never left your bones. She opened her mouth to reassure him when a sound broke through the storm, faint, thin, almost swallowed by the howl outside, a distant cry. David froze, his back straightened, his shoulders locked. It came again, a shaky trembling sound that threaded through the gusts, a cry but not human, sharp, high-pitched, desperate, a dog. Laura stood slowly. "It's probably just the wind." "That wasn't wind," David said, already moving toward the entryway. His voice had shifted, steady, alert, sharpened by instinct. Laura grabbed his arm before he could reach the door. "David, it's a blizzard out there. Visibility's almost zero. You can't walk in that." He turned toward her fully. Up close, she saw it in his eyes, the flicker of something she hadn't witnessed in a long time. Purpose, pain, and the ghost of an old trauma pushing him forward. "I heard something," he said quietly. "Something's in trouble." Laura tightened her grip. "You are not going out into that storm. You don't even know what's out there." He hesitated, feeling the fear in her voice. Her fear wasn't of the storm. It was of losing him all over again, the way she had nearly lost him the night of the mission, the way she almost lost him every night he didn't sleep. But the cry came again, weaker this time, and something inside David clenched. "If someone had heard Jack," he whispered, "and didn't go, I don't know how they'd live with that." Laura's expression faltered. The pain of that memory lived in both of them. She let her hand fall away slowly. "Take the radio and your flashlight," He squeezed her shoulder, gratitude softening the rigid lines of his face. Then he opened the cabin door. Wind slammed into him, snow swirling in violent bursts. He stepped out into the freezing dark, pulling his heavy coat tight around his frame and bracing his injured knee as best he could. Behind him, Laura stood in the doorway watching the outline of her husband vanish into white. The storm stung like needles against his skin as David made his way down the narrow trail leading to the lower valley. His boots sank deep into drifts, each step a fight against the push of the wind. The cry came again, closer now, clearer. He angled toward the ravine, using the beam of his flashlight to carve a thin path through the snow. The sound grew louder, more frantic. He could hear a second noise beneath it, a low, pained whimper. David pushed harder, the old injury in his leg screaming with each step. Then the snow thinned just enough for him to see a shadow curled near a fallen pine. A large German shepherd lay half-collapsed, her coat soaked and tangled with ice. She was slender, but not underfed. Her muscles were strong beneath the grime. Her fur was a deep sable, black down her spine, fading into rich chestnut along her sides. Her eyes were amber, but dulled by pain and exhaustion. She lifted her head weakly as David approached and let out another trembling cry. Not aggressive, not warning, simply pleading. "Easy," David whispered, crouching despite the stabbing pain in his knee. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dog flinched as he reached out, revealing a deep gash on her shoulder, likely scraped against rock or torn by debris in the storm. Snow clung to her whiskers, and her breathing was ragged. Then she shifted slightly, and David noticed something pressed beneath her body. A tiny shape. A newborn pup. Its fur barely thicker than a whisper, white and tan patches blending into the snow. Its eyes were closed, belly rising and falling in shallow breaths. The mother curled protectively around it despite her own wounds. David swallowed hard. He had seen courage in all forms throughout his career, but this instinctual, primal devotion hit him deeper than expected. "You're a fighter," he murmured, brushing snow from her muzzle. "A damn brave one." The shepherd whined and nudged the pup closer to David with her nose as if offering it, or begging him to save it. The gesture pierced something inside him he had kept sealed for years. A memory flashed, Jack Rowley pushing a wounded rookie toward David in the middle of gunfire, telling him to get the kid out seconds before the explosion took Jack's life. David shook the memory away, focusing on the dog. He slid his arms under her cautiously. She tensed, but didn't resist. He lifted her, cradling the pup against his chest with his free arm, and turned back toward the cabin. The trek back was slower, each step a battle against the wind, but with every cry from the pup and every shaky breath from the mother, something in David steeled. This time, he would not lose anyone, not tonight, not like before. When he reached the cabin, Laura ran out to help, her face flooding with shock and concern. "Oh my God, David, what happened?" "Found her near the ravine. She's hurt, but she was protecting her pup." Laura ushered them inside quickly, grabbing towels and blankets from the living room. The warmth of the fireplace filled the cabin, and the shepherd's trembling eased slightly as they wrapped her. "What do we call her?" Laura asked softly. David hesitated. The dog lifted her amber eyes, meeting his with a mixture of desperation and fragile trust. Something in them reminded him of a soldier who had survived something impossible. "Hazel," he said quietly. Laura nodded. "Hazel it is." As Hazel rested her head on the blanket, the pup tucked against her chest, David felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a pull toward something new, something fragile, unsure, but undeniably alive. A beginning. The storm had grown worse by the time David closed the cabin door behind him, the hinges shuddering as if the wind itself tried to pry its way in. Snow hammered the wooden walls, thick as wet sand, piling fast enough to bury footprints within minutes. Inside the small living room, the fire crackled weakly, struggling to compete against the cold that seeped through every gap. David set Hazel gently onto a large wool blanket near the hearth, the newborn pup still tucked against her stomach. But now that they were in the light, he finally saw the truth he had missed outside. Hazel's right hind leg was caught in a steel trap. The jaws of the mechanism were clenched deep into her flesh, hidden under ice and dirt. Blood had frozen in dark, rust-colored crusts along her sable fur. Hazel whimpered, chest rising in short spasms. Her amber eyes widened at the sight of David touching the trap, but she did not bare her teeth. She simply stared, trembling. Laura hurried in from the kitchen, already pulling her wool robe tighter around her thin frame. Her brown hair, hastily tied, had loosened strands falling along her flushed cheeks. She knelt beside David, eyes widening as she saw the metal trap. "Oh God, yes, that's a hunter's clamp, a big one." Her hands hovered above Hazel but did not touch. Laura always approached animals with a gentleness that never assumed trust. She must have dragged that thing for hours in the snow. David picked up the clamp with one hand and grabbed the bolt cutter from the emergency kit they kept near the fireplace. His fingers shook slightly, the cold mixing with something deeper, an involuntary tremor he thought he had overcome months ago. Laura saw his trembling and moved closer, steadying the tool with one hand. "I've got you," she whispered, not just encouragement, reminder. David took a breath. The metal jaws were thick, designed to hold wolves or coyotes. He positioned the cutter, jaw muscles locking. The moment the blades pressed against the steel, Hazel yelped and jerked. Laura instantly leaned over the dog, placing her hands gently but firmly on Hazel's shoulders. "Easy, sweetheart, easy. You're safe." Hazel's breathing slowed, but her entire body stayed tense, as if expecting pain. David squeezed. The trap didn't budge. His injured knee throbbed as he readjusted, weight shifting heavily. He pushed again, this time with every ounce of strength he still had. The metal groaned, then snapped with a sharp clang that echoed through the cabin. Hazel flinched, then collapsed fully onto the blanket, panting from relief and exhaustion. David threw the broken trap aside. It clattered across the wooden floor and landed near the wall, cold and cruel as the night itself. Laura examined Hazel's leg quickly. "Her flesh is torn, but she's still got circulation. She's lucky. If that trap had closed a bit higher." She didn't finish the sentence. David knew. The pup let out a weak squeak. It wriggled, trying to burrow deeper into Hazel's fur. David gently lifted the tiny creature to check its breathing. Its fur was damp, belly too cold, movements sluggish. "This little one is fading fast," he murmured, worry tightening his voice. Laura moved swiftly, the practiced focus of a former ICU nurse overtaking her. "Get blankets, the heated pad, and a pot of warm, not hot, water. We need to bring both of them up in temperature slowly." She rushed toward the bedroom to retrieve the medical box they kept for emergencies. When she returned, she placed it beside Hazel and rolled up her sleeves. Her hands were steady now, her movements precise. David watched her for a moment. He had always admired the way she transformed under pressure, from warm and patient to sharp, controlled, unshakably calm. It was why so many families trusted her during the worst nights of their lives. If anyone could pull Hazel and her pup back from the brink, it was Laura. Together, they worked through the night. Laura cleaned Hazel's wounds, cutting away matted fur with careful snips, washing blood and dirt from the torn flesh. David held Hazel's head, whispering soothing words when the dog whimpered. "You're all right, girl. Stay with us. You're doing good." Hazel watched him with glassy eyes, sometimes closing them in pain, sometimes opening them as if searching for reassurance. They wrapped Hazel's leg, applied antiseptic, and gave her small droplets of sugar water to keep her from crashing. Laura's movements were confident, yet gentle, her eyes narrowing only when she encountered something troubling. Pockets of deep bruising, a slight tremor passing through Hazel's ribcage. Meanwhile, David pressed the warm cloth against the pup's belly, rubbing in small circles to stimulate circulation. The pup let out faint cries whenever he lifted it, tiny paws twitching. Outside, the storm buried the cabin deeper, the wind howling through the chimney. Snow pressed against the windows like a white curtain, muffling the world. Time felt suspended between gusts and breaths. Hours passed before the pup finally let out a stronger cry, thin but unmistakably alive. Laura looked up, a relieved smile softening her tired face. "That's a good sign." David felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't known was gripping him. The pup wriggled against his palm and reached blindly for warmth. Hazel lifted her head, ears twitching weakly, and nudged toward her baby. Laura helped guide the pup back to Hazel's side. The newborn pressed into its mother's fur, seeking comfort. Hazel, despite her exhaustion, curled protectively around it, but Hazel's breaths remained shallow, her eyes heavy. Laura glanced toward the window where snow hammered relentlessly. "We're completely snowed in," she said quietly. "No vet can reach us until the storm clears. We're all they have." David nodded, jaw set in determination. For a moment, he imagined Jack Rowley sitting across the room, giving him one of his old looks, the one that said, "You know what to do, Mercer. Don't let fear choose for you." David closed his eyes briefly, hearing the echoes of the past, then forced them away. Tonight wasn't about ghosts. Tonight was about Hazel. Laura checked Hazel's leg again and frowned. "She's losing strength. Her blood volume's low and she's dehydrated." She rummaged through the med box, pulling out a small bag of glucose solution. "We can give her a little warm sugar water orally, but that's it. No IV without proper equipment." David helped tilt Hazel's muzzle so Laura could drip small amounts onto her tongue. Hazel swallowed slowly. The fire crackled behind them, warming the room unevenly. The clock on the wall ticked softly, mocking almost in its steady rhythm against the chaos outside. David shifted closer to Hazel, placing a steadying hand on her back, feeling the tremors that passed through her body. "Stay with us, girl," he whispered. "You made it this far." Minutes rolled into hours. The storm raged on. Near dawn, Hazel let out a strained breath, long, shaky, almost final. Her muscles tensed. The pup squeaked anxiously, sensing its mother's distress. David looked up sharply. "Laura." "I know." Laura moved to Hazel's side, feeling for her pulse. "She's crashing." David felt something cold settle inside him, something too familiar. He had seen this shift too many times in the eyes of fallen teammates, but he refused to accept it. Not now, not after everything Hazel had endured. He cupped Hazel's face gently, bringing her gaze to his. "Listen to me," he said softly yet firmly. "You fought through a trap, through the storm, through everything. Don't give up now." Laura pressed blankets closer around Hazel, warming her with heated towels. "Her temperature's too low. We need to get her core up. Help me hold the heat pads." David did. They worked frantically, hands moving with urgency and care. Hazel's breath shortened but didn't stop. Slowly, agonizingly, her pulse strengthened under Laura's fingers. Laura exhaled shakily. "She's holding on." David didn't realize he had been holding his breath until then. He leaned back exhausted, but kept one hand resting on Hazel's back. The dog's eyes fluttered open briefly, and she looked at him with something he recognized: gratitude and trust. The pup burrowed deeper into Hazel's fur, letting out a soft squeak. Hazel shifted enough to curl herself around her baby again. David and Laura exchanged a tired, emotional look. "We can't let this little family die here," Laura whispered. "We won't," David replied. "Not tonight." Outside, the storm finally began to ease, the wind softening from a howl to a sigh. But inside the cabin, hope had already taken root long before the blizzard calmed. The storm had passed, but the mountains still groaned under its weight. Snow clung to the pines like heavy white armor, and sunlight broke through the clouds in thin, brittle spears. Inside the Mercer cabin, warmth had returned slowly, first in the fire, then in the air, and finally in Hazel, who now slept curled around her tiny pup. The newborn, whom David had named Oak for the stubborn, living strength he saw in the little creature, was beginning to open his eyes. Soft, cloudy blue blinked up at the world with the fragile innocence of a life barely beginning. His tiny paws stretched, his small body pushing clumsily as he tried to crawl closer to Hazel's belly. Hazel lowered her head protectively, brushing her muzzle against Oak's side. The simple gesture stirred something deep in David's chest. For days, Hazel's trust had grown by inches, slow, cautious, but real. She no longer flinched when David approached. Sometimes she even nuzzled his hand, especially when Oak squeaked in hunger or discomfort. Laura would smile at those moments, observing the invisible threads forming between man and dog. She moved around the cabin in light steps, her slim frame still tired from sleepless nights, but her amber-flecked hazel eyes warm. The gentle slope of her cheekbones caught the sunlight as she watched Hazel, worry lingering at the corners, hope carefully stitched into the rest. David's knee still ached from the trek through the storm, a dull throb that flared when he climbed the stairs or bent too fast. But each morning he rose early, checking Hazel's bandages and Oak's temperature, refusing to let pain slow him. The ghosts of his past missions still whispered, but the presence of Hazel and Oak softened the edges. He found himself sitting beside them for hours without noticing time passing. By the fifth morning, Hazel could stand again. She limped heavily, putting only partial weight on the injured leg. But she walked. When she managed her first slow circle around the living room, tail hanging low but wagging once, just once, David felt a quiet triumph bloom in his chest. That was the moment the knock came. Firm. Official. Not the hesitant tap of a passerby. David stiffened. Laura, carrying a pot of warm broth from the kitchen, paused mid-step. Hazel lifted her head sharply, ears pricking. Oak stirred beneath her. The knock came again. "Mr. Mercer? Wyoming Wildlife Field Services." David exchanged a glance with Laura, concern shadowing both their faces. He opened the door. A tall man stood on the snowy porch, dusting frost from the shoulders of his dark olive-green uniform. He looked to be in his late 40s, broad-chested but lean, the sort of build typical of someone who spent years hiking rough terrain. His square jaw was dusted with sandy stubble, his cheeks windburned from exposure. His eyes were an unyielding gray, sharp, assessing, not unkind but not easily swayed. A badge on his chest identified him as Inspector Grant Holloway. Holloway gave a curt but polite nod. "Morning, Mr. Mercer. Sorry to show up unannounced. We're surveying the area after reports of illegal steel traps found near the lower valley. Had to check all nearby properties." David kept his face neutral, though his heartbeat quickened. "Come in. Cold out there." Holloway stepped inside, stomping the snow from his boots. He removed his gloves, revealing calloused hands and a long scar along his right index finger, a mark likely earned from years of dealing with frightened wildlife. He had the air of a man who took his job seriously, perhaps too seriously, shaped by regulations and a need to maintain order. His gaze swept the room automatically, likely habit. When he spotted Hazel, his expression changed, tightened. "That a German shepherd?" Holloway asked, voice flattening. "Looks injured." "She is," David said carefully. "Stray. Found her after the storm." Holloway approached slowly, posture straightening, hand hovering near the tranquilizer pistol at his belt. Hazel's body tensed. Oak let out a tiny squeak, which only made her curl tighter around him. Holloway frowned. "Is she nursing?" "Yes," David said. Holloway crouched a few feet away, examining Hazel without touching her. His eyes narrowed when he saw the wound on her leg and the frost-damaged patches of her fur. His trained gaze assessed quickly. Behavioral cues, injury patterns, the lack of a collar. "Stray mothers can be dangerous," he said. "Protective, unpredictable. Could be carrying diseases too. Distemper, parvo, rabies. Hard to know." David stepped subtly between Holloway and Hazel. "She's not dangerous." "That's not your call," Holloway said, his tone firm but not aggressive. "Under Wyoming Wildlife Code, any untagged injured canine with no proof of ownership is subject to containment and evaluation. If she's feral or diseased, euthanasia is the protocol." The word hit David like a punch. Euthanasia. The same cold finality he'd heard in military briefings, in the moments before impossible decisions. Laura inhaled sharply, setting the broth down too hard. The pot clinked against the table. "She's not feral," Laura said, stepping forward. "She responds to people. She trusts us." Holloway stood, dusting his hands. "Trust doesn't equal safety, ma'am, and procedures exist for a reason." David's voice hardened. "She's a dog we're caring for. That should count for something." Holloway crossed his arms, expression unmoved. "Then show me proof. Rabies vaccination, ownership papers, implant chip." He paused, eyes narrowing. "You have those. I'll file her as a domestic canine and walk out that door." David said nothing. Holloway read the silence correctly. 72 hours, he said. "That's how long you have to get me documentation. If you fail, I'm required to remove her, and the pup." Oak whimpered. Hazel let out a low growl, soft but warning. David clenched his jaw. "Inspector, she'll die if you take her. She barely survived the storm. She needs care, not confinement." "I don't make the rules," Holloway said. "I enforce them, and filing false ownership is a criminal offense." He adjusted his coat, preparing to leave. Clock starts now, Mr. Mercer. He nodded once at Laura, respectful, though distant, then stepped into the cold and shut the door behind him. Laura slumped into a chair, pressing a trembling hand against her forehead. David, what do we do? David stared at Hazel and Oak, their fragile existence contained in the small corner of the cabin. The image of Jack Rowley flashed through his mind. Jack urging him to save the rookie, pushing him toward safety while he stayed behind. David had lived with the guilt of losing him every day since. Quietly, he knelt beside Hazel. She met his gaze with tired, trusting eyes. Oak wriggled against her belly. He whispered, barely audible, "I can't lose anyone else. Not this time." Laura placed a hand on his shoulder. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "Then we fight for them." He nodded slowly, a resolve forming deeper than fear, deeper than protocol. 72 hours. Hazel's life and Oak's depended on what he could do before time ran out. The sky over the Wyoming ridge had darkened into a thick slate, the kind that warned of another storm rolling across the mountains. Sunlight flickered weakly against the ice-coated branches before vanishing entirely. David zipped up his heavy coat, the fabric stiff from days of wear and dried snow, and glanced toward Hazel and Oak curled beside the fireplace. Hazel's breathing had stabilized, but weakness lingered in the slow rise and fall of her ribs. Oak, though growing stronger each day, still clung to his mother with instinctive fear, his tiny body shivering whenever the cabin door creaked. They had no time left. 72 hours was not a window. It was a countdown. Inspector Holloway would return, and when he did, procedures would override compassion. David's past had taught him how systems consumed individuals. He had watched rules destroy men braver than himself. He would not watch them take Hazel and Oak. He turned to Laura, who was kneeling beside Hazel with a soft cloth, wiping her muzzle. Her slender frame was wrapped in a thick sweater, her brown hair tied loosely but already slipping along her pale cheeks. Exhaustion shimmered in the fine shadows beneath her eyes, but determination sharpened her jawline. She had always had a quiet strength, a resilience shaped by years of holding David together after missions. By every sleepless night, she waited for him to come home alive. "We have to go," David said quietly. Laura looked up, frowning. "Now? Before the next storm?" "If Holloway tracks the trap to the valley, he'll start making rounds here more often, and if he gets suspicious—" David stared at Hazel. "He'll take them." Hazel lifted her head as if sensing the shift. Her amber eyes flickered with both trust and fear. Oak squeaked, pawing at her fur. Laura hesitated, running her thumb along Hazel's forehead. "Where can we go?" David stepped to the window. Beyond the frosted glass, the mountains loomed, silent giants carved by bitter winds. "There's an old mountain patrol outpost 5 miles up the ridge. Half collapsed, but I trained there years ago. No one patrols it now. If we hide Hazel and Oak through the 3-day window, Holloway won't have grounds to seize them." Laura stared at him, a mixture of worry and reluctant confidence in her voice. 5 miles in this weather is dangerous." "I've made worse treks," David said, "and Hazel can't stay here." They began the preparations quickly. David wrapped Hazel's wounded leg, layering bandages with cloth strips reinforced by soft padding. Hazel tolerated the treatment with trembling patience. When he gently lifted her to test her weight, she stumbled, letting out a sharp yelp that pierced the room. "I've got you, girl," David whispered, pulling her close. "I won't let anything happen to you." Laura slipped Oak into the inside of her coat, placing the pup against her chest. Oak pressed into her warmth, tiny paws kneading instinctively. Laura smoothed her hand over his back. "He's so small," she murmured. "He wouldn't survive a minute out there on his own." Minutes later, they were outside, trudging through knee-deep snow. The cold sliced through the air like broken glass. Trees swayed under the weight of frost, their branches cracking softly. David took the lead, boots sinking heavily with each step. Hazel limped behind him, dragging her injured leg, but refusing to leave Oak's scent. Her loyalty burned through the cold, a glow in the bleak landscape. "Hazel, come here," David said when the slope grew steeper. He knelt, sliding his arms beneath her. She whimpered but didn't resist. Even wounded, her weight reminded him of her strength, solid muscle built for endurance. Laura walked behind them, Oak tucked close against her heartbeat. She supported Hazel's back legs whenever David paused. Snow whipped against her cheeks, stinging, but she pressed forward. "This is madness," she said softly, though not accusingly. "We're hiding from the law because the law won't protect them." David didn't look back. "The law isn't made for dogs like Hazel," he said. "It's made for convenience." 2 miles in, the wind grew harsher. Hazel shivered violently in David's arms, her breath short and thin. Her wound oozed faintly through the bandages, an angry red stain pushing through the white. "She's getting worse," Laura said, panic edging her voice. "I know." David tightened his grip, pushing through the incline. Snow swirled around them, thickening by the minute. The world shrank to white, the visibility narrowing until trees became silhouettes. David's knee burned as if struck with a knife, but he pushed on, teeth gritted. Another mile. Hazel wriggled weakly, trying to get down. David set her gently onto the snow. She limped forward a few steps, muscles trembling. Oak squeaked from inside Laura's coat, sensing his mother's struggle. Hazel turned, nudged David's leg with her muzzle, and kept moving. "She's telling us she can do it," Laura said quietly. "Just for now." David watched Hazel hobble determinedly, the stubborn perseverance reflecting something he had forgotten in himself. "She's got more spirit than most people I've known." By the 4th mile, the sky had darkened completely. The storm hit with savage force. Winds shoved at them like invisible hands. Snowflakes stung their skin, gathering in heavy layers on their coats. Hazel collapsed twice. Both times she rose again. Finally, the silhouette of the old patrol outpost emerged, a weathered structure half sunken into the cliffside, its roof sagging, windows smashed years ago. But it was shelter. They reached it just as Hazel crumpled entirely, unable to stand. "Hurry!" David said. He lifted her again, carrying her through the warped doorway into the dim shell of the outpost. The wind howled through the broken slats, but it was dry, and it was safer than the open wilderness. Inside, dust coated the floor. Rusted hooks hung from beams. Half a cot leaned against a wall. David set Hazel on the cot's remaining canvas, while Laura placed Oak beside her. Hazel licked Oak's head weakly, though her eyelids drooped with exhaustion. David surrounded them with insulated blankets they had carried, then knelt. His breath fogged the air. He touched Hazel's neck, feeling the heat, too much heat, fever. "She's infected," Laura murmured, voice shaking. "The wound's gone septic." Oak let out a fragile cry as if echoing her fear. David took Hazel's paw. Her pads were cracked, rough from dragging herself through snow and pain. Her gaze, foggy but still aware, met his. "You can't die," he whispered, voice raw. "Not after everything you fought through. I can't lose you. I can't—" Memories flooded him, Jack falling, the blinding flash, the ringing silence afterward, the emptiness that swallowed him whole. He had lost too much, teammates, friends, parts of himself he would never get back. Laura knelt beside him, sliding her slender fingers into his hand. Her warmth steadied him. "David," she said softly, "Hazel is stronger than she looks. She survived the storm, she survived the trap, but she needs us, all night." David pressed his forehead against Hazel's side. She let out a faint whine. "Stay," he whispered. "Please stay." Snow crashed against the collapsing roof. A cold draft whistled through the cracks. The small family huddled together, David on one side, Laura on the other, Hazel and Oak in the middle, two fragile flames against an endless winter. Through the bone-deep cold, through the fear, through the exhaustion, they stayed awake, feeding Hazel warm sugar water every hour, massaging her paws when they stiffened, keeping Oak warm beneath layers of blankets. A strange family. A broken man, a woman who had patched him together, a wounded mother dog, and a pup fighting for his first breaths. When dawn finally crept in, a weak gray that barely touched the horizon, Hazel stirred. Her fever had not vanished, but her breathing was steadier. Her eyes, though tired, were clearer. David brushed a hand along her head. "You're still here," he breathed. Hazel nuzzled his palm, and for the first time in years, David felt something like hope rising in him again. The storm had exhausted itself by dawn, leaving behind a world reshaped in silence. Snow glittered beneath the pale morning sun, soft as ash, untouched except for the faint trail leading to the half-collapsed outpost. Inside, David stirred awake, his back aching from hours spent sitting against the cold wooden beam. Hazel's head resting on his thigh. Her breathing, though shallow, was steady now. Oak slept curled beneath her chin, a tiny warm knot of life refusing to surrender. Laura rose first, her hair a tangle of auburn and frost, her cheeks flushed from the night's long vigil. She stretched stiffly and touched Hazel's forehead, relief loosening her shoulders. "Fever's lower," she murmured, barely containing the tremor of hope in her voice. David exhaled shakily. Hazel blinked up at him, eyes glassy but aware, and nudged his wrist with her cold nose. That gesture, small, fragile, felt like the answer to a desperate prayer. "We're not out of the woods," Laura said. "Not even close." "I know," David replied, rubbing Hazel's ear gently, "but she's still fighting." Laura pulled her phone from her pocket. Reception flickered weakly, a single bar catching the morning light. "I think I can call someone," she whispered. David stiffened. "Not Holloway." "No," she shook her head. "Someone who can help without paperwork." With numb fingers, she dialed a number she hadn't used in years. After 2 long rings, a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Laura? Is everything all right?" Laura closed her eyes in relief. "Miles, I need your help." Miles Harper had served as a combat veterinarian in the Marine Corps. A few years older than David, he had the build of a man who had insisted on staying strong long after the military spit him out, wide shoulders beneath a heavy parka, solid jaw covered with coarse gray stubble, and eyes that had seen enough suffering to read pain like a language. He was a man of few words and fewer judgments, a quiet presence who carried his own share of ghosts, but never let them bleed onto others. He arrived 2 hours later on a snowmobile, its engine rumbling like a distant beast. When he stepped inside the outpost, frost clinging to his beard, he paused only a moment to assess the situation. "All right," he muttered, kneeling beside Hazel. "Tell me everything." Laura described the infection, the injury, the fever, the trek. Miles listened with the stillness of a seasoned medic, no panic, no wasted motion. When Hazel whimpered as he touched her leg, he murmured a low reassurance, his voice steady, almost tender. "This girl's tougher than she looks," he said, examining the wound. "But she needs proper cleaning. You two did everything right with what you had. Let's finish it." He unpacked a canvas medical kit, sterile wraps, antibiotics, saline, a field-grade splint, even pain meds strong enough for a full-grown German shepherd. David stared. He hadn't seen that much veterinary equipment outside of a military base. Miles smirked at his expression. "Old habits." For the next hour, the outpost became a makeshift clinic. Miles worked with calm precision, cleaning out infection with warm saline, removing dead tissue, adjusting Hazel's old bandage with deft movements. Hazel trembled under his hands, but trusted him enough not to fight. He slid a lightweight carbon fiber splint over her leg, one meant for working dogs injured in combat. "This should stabilize the limb. She'll walk again, but slowly," he said. Laura let out a relieved breath. Oak crawled toward Miles with unsteady steps, nosing his boot. The pup's fur was a soft patchwork of black and muted tan, his ears still floppy. Miles chuckled, scooped Oak up, and checked his vitals. "This little one is strong, hungry, cold, but strong." David felt something ease inside his chest, something that had been coiled tightly since the night he found Hazel. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. Miles nodded. "Let them rest. Keep Hazel warm, and clean the wound twice a day. I'll check in." But then he looked at David, sensing the unspoken tension. "What trouble are you in?" David told him everything, the illegal trap, Holloway's visit, the threat of euthanasia. Miles's jaw tightened. He had no love for bureaucracy. His years in service had taught him how rules could consume the innocent. "You've got 72 hours, Miles muttered. "Then let's make you legal." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "I never got rid of my old connections. Working dog registry, transport documents, microchip forms. We'll make Hazel and Oak official. No shelter, no pound, no questions." Laura blinked. "Miles, are you serious?" "David saved my life once in Kandahar," he said simply. "I haven't forgotten." David swallowed hard, memories flashing, dust, gunshots, a collapsed wall, Miles dragging him out while shrapnel tore through his shoulder. "I didn't save you alone." "No," Miles said, "but you didn't leave me. I'm not leaving you now." For the rest of the morning, they worked. Miles implanted microchips, filled out registry documents, even printed temporary tags from a portable labeler he carried. By noon, Hazel Mercer and Oak Mercer existed in the system as legally owned, fully vaccinated family dogs. Now Holloway can't touch them, Miles said, packing up. Even if he suspects something, the law is on your side. David closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the reversal of fate. Hazel lifted her head to lick his hand, her tail thumping weakly against the blanket. "You're safe," he whispered to her. "I'm not letting anyone take you." 3 days later, when Holloway returned to the Mercer cabin, he found the home empty. Fresh snow masked the tracks, no dogs, no signs of recent movement. Laura had left a kettle warm on the stove, intentionally misleading. Holloway wandered through the home, his sharp blue eyes, set into a weathered face and framed by silver hair, scanning each corner. He was not cruel, only rigid, a man hardened by decades of law enforcement, but still possessing a sense of quiet humor. He stepped outside and found a single manila envelope tucked under a stone on the porch railing. Inside were registration papers, clean, official, irrefutable. He stared at them, then huffed a slow, weary laugh. "Law Mercer," he muttered, shaking his head. "Ong le kutem hai mangnu aroa." He tucked the envelope into his coat, turned, and walked back toward his truck. He didn't file a report. He didn't write a memo. He simply drove away, a small smile hiding beneath his stern mustache. He knew some battles weren't worth fighting, especially the ones where the good guys had already won. Back at the outpost, Hazel rested between David and Laura, Oak snuggled close. Sunlight filtered through the cracked slats of the wall, warm enough to feel like spring despite the freezing air outside. David leaned back, Hazel's head on his knee, Oak chewing clumsily on his thumb. For the first time in years, he felt whole, a man reborn under a new sun. They had saved Hazel and Oak. But in truth, Hazel and Oak had saved him first. Lives don't always collide by accident. Sometimes they cross paths at the exact moment they're needed most. A wounded mother dog fighting for her pup, a retired special ops officer fighting the ghosts of his past. 2 different battles, but the same desperate need for hope. Saving Hazel and her tiny pup wasn't just an act of compassion. It was the moment that reminded him that healing is still possible, even after years of carrying silent pain. And that's a truth for all of us. Sometimes, the life you save becomes the life that saves you back. In our everyday world, we pass by people and animals carrying invisible struggles. A small act of kindness, a moment of courage, a choice to care can change everything. We never know whose life we might touch or whose life might transform ours. If this story moved you or made you feel something today, share this video so others can experience it too. Leave a comment. Tell us what part touched you the most. Subscribe to the channel for more emotional, inspiring stories that brighten the world one life at a time. Thank you for being here. Your kindness matters more than you know.